Welcome to this tutorial. It is all about Node.js today. Yeah, we'll be talking about Node.js for the next few series of videos that I'm going to be making, and it's going to be a totally beginner friendly video. It's going to be a command line application, so we will not be needing so much of extra weight for somebody that is just starting out. The reason for creating this is to help people starting out in Node.js, or people without programming knowledge, to be able to start out in Node.js without much stress. So what we'll be doing is we'll be building a CRUD application, but it will be a command line application, with no interface, but it will help you see the full power of Node.js. The beautiful thing about JavaScript now is that it's not just the browser that understands it. The computers now understand it, and it's different from when we use JavaScript for only front-end applications. Now we can use JavaScript for back-end applications through the help of Node.js and the Google V8 engine. And I really hope you enjoy this video as we get started. For you to get started, you will need to download the Node.js latest and stable one, that is 18.14.0. It is recommended for most users, but you can get the 19.6.0, which is the current one. Now, while this is the current version as at the time when I'm producing this video, it might not be the same as at when you will be watching this video or taking this tutorial, but it doesn't matter. Always go for those ones recommended for the users, and that is usually on the left. It's usually written there, so you don't have anything to be confused about. So after downloading it and installing it, it is pretty straightforward. Then you want to check on if everything was done correctly. So what you can do is to check for the version. If it returns a version number, then that means what you installed is correct. Something else to notice: when you install Node, it also installs NPM. NPM is Node Package Manager. As we continue, you will see how and why it is important. But generally, it helps us to add extra codes or external codes that are not written by us to our own code in order to make us write faster and more efficiently. So to check if Node was installed properly or correctly, just type node and version, node version, like this. Hit enter. Oh, sorry, just node and double hyphen there, version, and it should return a version number like this. So for me, I do not have the latest. I am using version 16.15.1, and that is totally fine. It doesn't really matter. You just need to have Node installed. Then to also check for NPM, just do NPM hyphen. You can do double hyphen version, or you could just do hyphen v this way. Hit enter and it returns a version number. Once you can return a version number, then that means everything is properly installed. Now you can actually check out Node.js in the terminal to see the power of Node.js, and you notice that as soon as we hit into Node, so just do Node enter, it welcomes us into the version of Node, and then you could manipulate JavaScript from here. For example, you could do something like 5 plus 5, and that should give us an answer. The answer is already coming up. When you hit enter, it gives you 10. So stuff like that. But we will not be working just here in the terminal. We'll write code that will help us to use the terminal. That's what we want to do. And I'll be demonstrating to you what we will achieve by the end of this tutorial. So let me bring this in. This is a demo code I have written. I'll just demonstrate based on what we'll be doing here. So one thing that we'll be doing, first of all, let me get rid of the db.json. It will be automatically created, so let me delete that. Okay, good. So one thing that we will do, the very first thing that we'll do will be to add data. So we will have to run the add data file. So to run a file, we just need to do node, the name of that data. You could add the extension or not, but that's totally fine. Hit enter. It asks for name, and you enter name. Sam is fine. You ask for phone number. You put whatever your number is. You ask for adult. So the adult has multiple choice options. So you just pick the one you want. So Sam is an adult. So hit enter, and it is saved. Yeah. Notice that it creates the db.json file that wasn't there. That's part of the things you'll be learning. You'll be learning how to manipulate files, and then you learn a few other things like using the terminal, using modules and all that. Now, after adding data, something else we can do is to retrieve the data. So for us to retrieve data, the code is written in the retrieve.data file, sorry, retrieve data.js file. So we just need to do node retrieve, yeah, retrieve data. Hit enter. It returns this data that I just entered. Notice Sam and the gibberish I entered. All right. Now after this, what next? What next is to update the file. So let's update. We do node update file. Node updates data. Sorry. Hit enter. First thing it does is always to return for us the data that is already existing. Now what we want to do is pass in this data, and it will retrieve this data for us. Sorry, passing the ID, and it retrieves this data for us. So you copy this, paste it here, and hit enter. Now it has retrieved the data for us, and now it's asking us what is your name. So what we want to do here is to update what is already there, and what is already there is Sam. So we want to change that to Ebere. Hit enter. I do not want to change the phone number, so if I hit enter, it will keep the initial value. So I hit enter. Now for the adult, I could change it to N, which means no, it's not an adult, or he's a minor. Hit enter. It's updated. Now if you decide to retrieve this data again, you should see the updated data, and now we have Ebere instead of Samson, and we're having a minor here instead of an adult. Beautiful, right? Finally, what we can do is to delete data, and to do that we use the remove data file. So we do node remove data. Yeah, hit enter. This is the only data here. We want to remove it, and so we copy the ID, paste it, hit enter, and it tells us deleted. Now how can we be sure that this data has been deleted? Check the db.json file. I notice that we now have just an empty array, unlike what we would have had if we had entered a data. Now just to confirm what we have done, Control K to clear the terminal. Now let's create a new data. Hit enter. It's showing an empty array because there's nothing here. That's just what we have here, but that's fine. We'll add Njoku. What's Njoku's phone number? You just put some gibberish, and that's fine. That's the phone number. And then is he an adult? Yes, it's an adult. Hit enter, and notice that how quickly it updates this file, and we now have another code inside of here. Sorry, another data inside of here. Something that you didn't see but was working on underneath is the db file check. This checks if the db file exists. Now this is necessary for the update file and the delete file. Yes, two of them. Notice that we'll call the function here. Once there is no database, no file, all what happens there is it do not run. It do not even try to run the code at all, not to talk about running and returning errors. So this is important in order to save time and to save resources generally, and to make our code more robust. So this is what we'll be building in this tutorial, and this is the first one. I'm really happy, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we'll be talking about a whole lot. Now a good thing I could do is to share with you the list of things we are going to be learning. So we've already done the introduction and the installation of Node and NPM. So what we are going to be doing in the next video is going to be how to set up projects and how to install dependencies. After that, we move to how to create a new file from the terminal, and maybe we'll also take up how to check if a file exists. After that, we should take the next two, which is how to query a database and how to retrieve data. Then add data should be a video of its own, or a tutorial of its own. How to edit data should also be a video of its own, and I think how to delete data should also be a video of its own. Either ways, we have a lot to learn, and I look forward to having all of you leave comments about what you learn and how you intend to grow. I will also leave some more tutorials that you can take after this in order to grow your Node.js skill. So I'll see you in the next video. Catch you. Hey, it's the second video for this tutorial series, and I'm really excited about it. Now we are taking this as gradual as possible, and so last tutorial, the last video, I was able to teach you how you can install Node.js and NPM. So what we are going to be doing in this video is to set up our project and install the necessary dependencies. So for us to start, navigate to somewhere inside your computer that you like your code to be. So I would like my own to be inside of document. You can use a terminal. I use my terminal on Mac. You can use yours on Windows or wherever that you have them. The commands are similar. So cd into documents. That's how we navigate. Cd means change directory. So now I'm in document folder. I will create a folder known as Node.js crud, something like that. Node.js crud. So the command is make dir and name of the folder Node.js CLI crud. I think this makes more sense. Hit enter and the file has been created. Just to confirm that we already have the file, just do ls, hit enter, and you will see it here. So you should also check your own out. Clear it with Ctrl K. Ctrl K clears your terminal. So what we want to do next is to navigate into the folder that we just created. So you can do a cd into it, cd into Node.js underscore CLI underscore crud. Hit enter and we're inside of this folder now. Now we could choose to work inside of this folder from the terminal here, but I would love to work inside of the folder but using VS Code. VS Code is an editor that helps us to write code. It provides a terminal for us to use as well as a place for us to write code. So having everything in the same place is easier and it's fun for me. It's more interactive. It makes sense. So I will just open this folder in VS Code. You could also check out VS Code on the internet and just download yours. So for me to do that, I just do code space period like this. Hit enter and it opens up for me. It opens the project in an editor like this. Yeah, that's it. So it's that beautiful. And I could just open this folder in a terminal as time goes on. So for me to open it in a terminal, I could just do the Control Shift backtips, and just like that, we have the terminal open like this. Beautiful. So whatever we want to do now, we can do it from here. So first thing we've done is to create a folder. So next thing is to initialize the the project. So for you to initialize the project, you do npm init. So here in the inside of the folder in the terminal, you do npm init and hit enter. Now that will start bringing up for you some prompts to maybe fill in names and other stuff. You could fill in that, but you could just hit enter until you get to the last one and it will create a file for you. That is the package.json file. And here you have it, the package.json file. Beautiful. That's awesome. Now, before we continue, we need to add a line here, and that will be type module. The reason for adding this is because we are going to be working with the latest or a newer type of JavaScript, which is the ES6 JavaScript. We use it to import modules. So if you don't have this line here in the package.json, it would not work as you expect. But that's by the way. Now with this, we are now ready to install dependencies. Now, what are dependencies? You could also call these packages or modules. These are external codes written by some other people in order to help us write code faster. So this code, these programmers have taken their time to write this code and give it to us so that we do not have to rewrite it. There's no point writing a code that has already been written, except it's really, really, really necessary. We'll be using two of those dependencies. One is the inquirer. The inquirer helps us to collect or prompt users to give us input from the command line. And the second one is the UUID. UUID. It helps us to generate unique identifiers for each of the data that we'll be adding to our database. To install a dependency, you just need npm. By the way, NPM, that's the Node Package Manager, helps us to install all these kind of external codes. So they all live on the website there. So you could check out the NPM website. I'll try to put it down there in the description. So what you need is npm install and then the package name. So if we are going to install UUID, for example, what you need is npm install UUID. Now npm also gives us the liberty to install more than one package at a time. So all you need to do is to separate each package from the other using a space. So if I'm going to install UUID and install Inquirer, I just need to give a space like this, Inquirer, like this, and that is it. You'll be able to install these two. Something else you need to know is that you don't need to spell the install in full. You could just use an I like this, and so you can install UUID and Inquirer at the same time. So hit enter and it starts installing. Now when it's done, you will see these names added as dependencies here. Beautiful, it's done installing, and here we have the dependencies. These are the two dependencies we have just installed. And if you look here in the list of files and folders here, you will notice that we now have a new folder node modules. This folder contains all the bunch of external files that we can add, but we do not really need to look into this. We don't need it. No, we don't need it. We just need to know that this code behaves in this way or in the other way, and then forget about it. The package lock.json, we also don't need to look into that, but if you feel like you could look into it, there is really nothing you want to do here. It is just part of the settings for our project. And that completes the setup of our project. We are now ready to start creating files and doing some other things here. So the first thing we might want to do is to create files that we'll be working with in this tutorial. We'll be working with a bunch of files. But how do we create these files? Now to create file, for Mac, you just use touch the file name and it creates the file. If you're using Windows, you need echo with a dot and a greater than sign, and then the file name, stuff like that. You could check that out. Like npm, we also have the liberty of creating more than one file at a time, and all you need to do is separate each file with a space. So which files are we going to be needing in this tutorial? Let's start listing them out. Let's do touch like this. Yeah. What is the first file? The first file is query db. This will help us to query the db, get data back, and then run every of the other functions that we'll be creating in other files. As we continue, you'll learn more about this. The next file we want to create is the db file check. That helps us to check if the db file exists. .js. Please ensure that we are adding the .js extension. .js like that, yeah. db file check will check if the file is there. If it's not there, it will terminate. The next one is the add data.js, followed by retrieve data.js. I hope I'm spelling all that correctly. Okay. Then update data.js. Yeah. After update data, you now have the remove data.js. Now the rest of the file is self-explanatory, and those are the files we need. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think files. That is what we need. Now once you hit enter, these files will be created immediately. Now notice that these files are not here now, so we just hit enter and all these files are created in one go. You see how fast it is? It's faster than trying to hit here to create a new file and typing in the name and all that. So in just one command, we are able to create all these files. These files are empty, yes, but we'll be filling them out from the next tutorial or the next video in this series. Catch you. All right, welcome to the third video in this series. So we've been able to install Node and NPM. We've been able to set up our projects. In the last video, we saw how to install dependencies, and we created files that are necessary for these projects. So we want to begin by writing the code for the DB file check, where we'll be looking at how to check if a file exists. We want to check if the db.json file exists. If it exists, then nothing happens. But if it does not exist, then the code has to be terminated. But let's begin by checking. How do we check? Now, I told you we'll be learning how to manipulate files. Node.js provides us with an inbuilt module called file system. For us to use this file system, we just need to import it. So what we need to do is import fs, that is short for file system, from fs. This will be in quotes, so put this in quotes, and that is it. Come down here and check. Let's check for the what's the name, the db.json file. Now, file system provides us with a method known as exist sync. So let's type it out. Exists sync, like so. Now, any file you pass into this will be checked, and you see if it exists or not. So here we are passing in the db.json file. So let's do this db.json file. Now, how do we get an output? Just to be sure if it is true or not, let's see. We could do an if statement. So if is a conditional statement that we could use to check if something is true or false, and then do some other stuff. So the condition has to go inside of this bracket, and then whatever we want to happen, if it is true or false, depending on what we want it to be, will go into the braces. So we move this into this bracket. Now, if this returns true, let's log to the console. We want this to show on the console. Console.log file exists. So we just type file exists. Now this is all you really need to check if a file exists. Now, to check if this is working, let's run the file by saying node db file check. Node db file check, we hit. Now, it doesn't return any answer or any response. But what happens if we put in a file that exists? For example, let's do the add data.js file. We save it. Now let's run this file again. You hit enter, and it tells us file exists. Now this is because we have the add.data.js file, but for the db.json file, we do not have it. So what we want to do here is to check if this file doesn't exist. Now, if the file doesn't exist, we want to return an output, or maybe just terminate the process. Now, how do you check if a file doesn't exist? What we will need to do is invert whatsoever statement that we are putting here. For us to invert this, we need to put an exclamation sign here. So whatsoever is here will be inverted. So this time around, we will say file does not exist. Now, if we save this, we should get no output because add.data.js file exists. So this, and there is no output. Now let's change what we have here to db.json again. Save it. Now output it. Output Node.js, node db file check. Hit enter, and it tells us that file does not exist. Beautiful. That is what we are looking to do. So how do we intend to use this code in other files? We've actually done what we really want to do, and that is to tell a person who probably wants to update or maybe remove data that, hey, the file doesn't even exist, so you can't do that. But how do we get to use this code in other files? It is just like when we say that we'll be using external codes, that is code written by other people, in our own code. For us to use such code, for example, the fs, that is the file system, we had to import it. Now, we were only able to import this because they have exported it. So for us to be able to use this code in other files, we need to export it. Now, how do we export it? We use the export command. So let's clear this and say export. We'll put default. This default keyword is important because it is the first file that we are going to be exporting. It is expected that the first file has that default, the default keyword. All right. Now we can make it an asynchronous function if we want. It is not actually necessary. Then we now use the function keyword, function. So a function basically packages code, and then when you call the function, yes, it executes whatsoever is inside that function. We'll now give the function a name. We'll give it the same name that our file has, and that is db file check. Make sure you open and close braces like this. That is the regular braces, and then open and close curly braces. This is where we will be putting in our code. And so let's paste the code that I copied. Inside of here, we can pass in any data that we want, just in case of future. You'll see where we'll be passing in data from these braces. That is why the braces are there. Now, if you don't pass in any if you don't pass in any data, nothing would happen. So we are saying that file does not exist here, but after this, we want to make sure that this code terminates. So we will call on a function known as exit. Now, exit is also an imported function or method from a module called process. So it was automatically imported for me because I have all that set up in the VS Code. So as soon as I hit the exit and put it down there, it imports it for me. I could add one because that's the code that is used to terminate processes. And that is all you need in order for you to check if a file does not exist, that is the db.json file, and then terminate the code as necessary. That's all, nothing else. Now, we'll start using this code, or we'll call on this function in the future, not now. We'll call on this function when we will be building our updates data function and the remove data function. But right now, this is what we have, and I'll see you in the next tutorial where we'll be talking about how to query database and retrieve data. See you then. Yo, this is the fourth video in this series, and we'll be looking at how to retrieve data, and beyond retrieving data, we'll also be looking at how we could set up function that would help us to execute other codes, because these codes are interrelated to each other. There's a whole lot we are going to be learning, so let's jump right in. So how do we retrieve data? We are able to retrieve data from a particular file if we are able to read that file. So in other words, what we want to do in this video is to read files. So how do we read files? Remember that we do not have the db.json file, right? So we'll still try to read the file just to show you how it behaves, what happens when we do that. So I will first import fs from fs, and then fs provides us with a method known as read file. In the read file takes in the file name and then a callback function that either throws an error or returns the data that exists inside that file. So the file we want to look at is db.json, and then it takes a function, a callback function. So let's create that function here. It has no name, and then inside of here it takes in two parameters, that is the error and the data. So the error represents whatsoever error that is encountered when trying to read the file, and then the data represents whatsoever we get after reading the file successfully. So what we'll say here is if error exists, if error is there, let's log to the console. Some of these things I'm doing, you already know them. We've seen them in previous videos, so it shouldn't be so difficult. I hope you're able to follow. So we log to the console saying something went wrong, and then show the error that we got. However, yeah, we could also exit this place. We just exit as usual. Just exit, just as we exited the other time. We use one as as usual. All right, then assuming that everything goes well, let's log the data to the console. So we just put in data here, and that is it. This is all you really need to read the file. And we're trying to read the db.json file. So what will it tell us when we try to run the file? So let's do node query db. What happens? Hit enter, and it tells us that something went wrong. What exactly went wrong? When we look closely at the error here, it's saying that no such file or directory. That means that this file does not exist. Let's try reading a file that exists and has something in it, and that would be the db file check. db file check, let's just be sure we spell that correctly. db file check. Okay, I think that's correct. You save that, and then you run this again, hit it, and what does it tell us? db file check does not. Okay, we're using a wrong extension. It should be .js, not .json. So save it again. All right, let's clear the terminal, run it again, and hit enter. Now it returns our data because the file exists, but notice that it returns it as a buffer. Let's zoom in on this. It returns it as a buffer with codes. Yeah, a very long code. So what do we do about this? Now let's go back to our code, and then let's make this to be readable. For us to make it readable, we need to convert this to a string. So we do dot to string. Dot to string. Don't forget about the closing braces. Save it, and then let's try reading that file again. So Ctrl K to clear, read the file again, hit enter, and boom, we have everything that is written in that file. Isn't this awesome? This is everything we have in that file. And so we could choose to manipulate this just as we wish. It's a string at this point. Beautiful. Now, if you recall, we said that we want to do more than just retrieve file and show file in this particular file. So retrieve data and show data in this particular file. We want to be able to take in functions from other files and run them through this particular function. So that means first we need to export this function. Now I made a mistake in the other file when we were creating the db file check. I said the default keyword is necessary. Where is that? I said default keyword is necessary when you're exporting the file. Now you're not actually exporting the file, I mean exporting the function, not exporting the file. We could have multiple functions in this file, as we'll see very soon, but the only one can have the default keyword because it's like the base function or the default function. So just to have that at the back of our mind. So back to this, what we want to do is first export the function, take in a parameter or an argument, and then write a code that would handle all those scenarios. But let's begin by exporting. So we want to convert this to something that will be exported. So let me cut and hold on to that code, and then export it to be default. It will be asynchronous. This is very necessary, especially for when you'll be reading files that are from remote locations that are not in your computer. So it will take some time for you to get the data back, so that you don't run into timeout or stuff like that. So try to ensure that your function is asynchronous, and the file system manipulations are also asynchronous. All right. So async function, you hit enter, it auto creates the function for me, and I'll be naming this function the same name of the file, and that's query db. Awesome. Now it will be taking an argument, and we want that to be the external function. Awesome. All right, it's getting a little longer, so let's reduce the font. I hope you can see that. Or maybe let me just drag this out and keep the fonts bigger. Yes. All right, just so that you can see everything properly. Now let's paste back this function here, and we'll try calling it from another file where we'll actually retrieve data, and that is the retrieve data.js file. So first of all, this function will no longer work in this file because we are not calling it here in this file. So just to test that out, control clear, run the file again, and you get no output. For this function to work, we need to call it somewhere. Now we could call it here like this, and that should work. Call this here, hit, and we get our output, right? But since we want this file to do a lot of work, it might start to interfere with other files when we start passing in the functions from other files into this function. So what we want to do is to ensure that we are retrieving the file when we're supposed to retrieve it, and we are using the data when we're supposed to use it, just to separate concerns and also make our project very modular, easy to read. We'll use another file to retrieve the data. So we'll now call this function in another file, and that is the retrieve data file. So just the same way that we imported the fs module, we'll also import the function, that's the query db function, from the query db.js file. So let's do that. Import query db, right, from this. Make sure it has the extension .js here. All right. And all we need to do is just to call the function query db here and close that bracket. Save it, and then let's call the function here. We've cleared here. All right. Let's now, just to be clear, when we call this, it gives us no output. Now let's call the retrieve data function. Retrieve data file, sorry. Hit, and we have the output. Awesome. Everything is working perfectly. Now we'll come back to test this file again, just to be sure everything is working fine, after we've finished building out the query db file, just to be sure. So what do we want to happen here? Now this external function sometimes might need to be run only after we've been able to retrieve data. For example, when we are working with the remove data file or the update data file, we need to have retrieved the data before working on those files. However, if we're working with the add data file and there is no file, that add data file will create the file, that is the db.json file, right? And so we will not need to have retrieved data before running that file. So in order to make sure that all these scenarios work properly, we'll rewrite all this code that we have here, just to make sure that everything is clear. So let's clear this, all right? And then we'll start with the try and catch block. The try and catch block will help us to catch errors easily, and then all our code that we really want to try out will go into the try block. Cool. So the try block will just log the error to the console. So log to the console and see something went wrong. Yes, and then we'll just add the error, what went wrong. And that is it. All right. All right. Now back into the try block. This is where everything actually lives. The first thing we want to do here is to create a variable where we'll be keeping the data that we'll be getting from inside of the db.json file. All right. So we will use a let info equal to empty braces like this. All right. This is a square bracket. Okay. Now the first thing is to check if the file exists. So let's do an if statement. It's going to be an if else. So if else like this. And what's the condition? fs.existsync. We want to check if the db.json file exists. All right. Now, if this file exists, then we can now read the file. So you put await fs.read file. Read file. Remember, it takes in two arguments, and the first one is the file that is being read. Get this off. All right. The file that is being read, that is a db.json file, and then the function, the callback function that has no name. All right. The callback function also takes in two arguments, and that is the error and data. Now, if error, so if for example error occurs, we want to make sure that we terminate the process. So if there's error, right? If there's error, we'll log to the console and say reading file failed. We can add the error by the side for context. All right. Now, if there is no error, we want to process the data. So for us to process the data, we'll need to convert it to string and then convert it to the original format that it was. We are expecting that the db.json data would be in arrays, and it will be arrays of objects of every data that we passed in. So by passing it through the json.parse, it will help us to convert it back to the regular array. Remember, we first of all converted it to string, from buffer to string, before we'll be converting it to what it was before, and it's going to be an array. So let's get it back. First thing we want to do is data dot to string. Remember, to string. Now this converts it to a string, but we want to take it back to what it really was before it was made a string, and it was an array. So we're converting it back to an array using json.parse, and then we'll put this inside of here. Beautiful. So we now have an array if the file was existing. Now that we have this, we can now save what we have here in the info variable, and that is awesome. So what is next at this point? At this point, we want to check if an external function was passed in and there is really no error. So if an external function was passed in and there is no error, then we'll continue by running this code. So we want to check if external function and check that there is no error. So the double and is saying that these two conditions must be true for this block to run. Now if these two conditions are true, then we will now run this function. This function would be needing the info variable that we have here. Basically what this is saying is, while running this function, you pass in this database data into the function so that the function can use, and after it's done using it, it returns the updated function back to the database. Make sense? Now there will be one case when we want to make sure that we terminate any process after an error or after a block is done. So let's use the okay, this is not really necessary here. We can just stay like this, yeah, and that's fine. But we could use a return just to be sure. We just use a return. Same thing for here. We could use a return. All right. Then how about in the other case? So let's say we have a function, the add data function especially. It is here and there is no file, but we want to add data. Now at the point of adding data, it is okay not to have a file, because the add data file will create the file. So we want to do if the external function exists. At this point in the else block, it already means that the file doesn't exist. So if that file doesn't exist and the external function exists, we'll just run the external function and return here like that. That is it. So either ways, we are getting what we asked for. We'll think we'll need to remove this exit from here. That wasn't necessary. All right, so let's save that. Just to be sure that the retrieve data file still works. So let's clear this, do the retrieve data, hit it. It returns nothing because we do not have this db.json file. But let's be clear, db file check.js, save it. Okay, we'll also need to copy, paste it here. We just want to be sure that we are not breaking anything that we have set up before. So let's save this and run this again, hit it. We have an error somewhere, undefined one. So where is this? json.parse. So undefined one. So where are we having an error? This data.toString. Oh, yeah, we can't actually pass what we have here. We can't actually, let's comment that out. We can't pass that. It's not an array yet. What we have here is just a bunch of text. We don't have a bunch of text, but let's be sure that we are getting the right thing here. So let's log to the console what we are getting. Log, do data.toString, save, and let's run this again. Beautiful, everything works fine. So what was happening before was, we are expecting that what we'll be passing into the database would be an array. So because we are expecting that it would be an array, we have decided to pass it. And as at the point of passing it, we are doing a wrong conversion which doesn't exist. But as we continue, you see why this code is correct. So we can just get this away from here, and then we'll log the info to the console. We just want to be seeing what we have in the database at every point. So for every time we call it, we want to have it. All right. So let's clear this. Everything works perfectly from what we have done so far. But I'll give you a run through again for what we are doing here. So what we are doing here is we are retrieving data from the database, which at the moment really doesn't exist, but we have tested using the db file check, and we see that it's working. When we start working properly on adding data, which is actually the next video, you will see how we will create that file, how we'll add to the file, and how we'll retrieve it, and you see everything makes more sense. We want to change this back to db.json because that's what we'll be working with. Feel free to create a db.json file and put in a bunch of code and see what comes out of it. You know what? I think we'll just do that right away, just to be sure. db.json file, we are creating that. Hit enter, and we need an array of anything. So an array of name Sam. Yeah, Sam. Let's save that. Now let's try to retrieve this file. So, all right. Sorry. Let's try to retrieve this file. So hit this, and then we have an error. Node retrieve. Yeah, it's supposed to be retrieve data. Retrieve data. So hit enter, and then notice that we have exactly what we have here in this place. So to show you that what we did here works perfectly, assuming we had a db.json file. Makes sense? All right, let me walk you through what we have done here again. The first thing we did was to export the function that we are creating, and that is a query.db function. We also took in an external function which we'll create subsequently, and then we all right, and then we began by creating a try catch block. Recall that we said that the try catch blocks help us to catch error at this point. So if everything inside here fails, then we can catch the error here. All right, now inside the try block, we began by creating a variable This info variable is to hold the data that we will be retrieving in a moment. Then we now check, does this db.json file exist? Now, if it doesn't exist, for a file like the add data file, it will still run down here. However, a file like the update data and the remove data won't get to this end because the db file check would have terminated the process. Now, if it exists, we retrieve the data, or we try to retrieve the data. Now, if there's an error, we return this error and return, and the process stops. If there is no error, then if there is no error, we get our data back and we convert it back to what it's supposed to be, and that is an array. Now, after that, we now check if the external function exists and there is no error, then we will execute. If not, we come down here and check. Now, let's assume that the file isn't there, but we have the external function. What do? We execute, and that's all that is happening in this code. We have gotten this right, and we will move to the add data file in the next tutorial or in the next video. See you in that one. All right, it is time for us to work on the add data file. What we want to do at this point is to collect data collect input from the terminal, then gather it, make it into an object, and then add it to the database. In this place, we'll be using the inquiry dependency. We'll be using the UUID dependency. We'll be creating new file. We'll be overwriting file. There's a whole lot that we'll be doing in this file. So I'm ready once you're ready. All right, so the first thing we want to do here is to import everything we need. We'll be needing the the file system module. We'll be needing the UUID module. We'll be needing the inquirer module, and then of course we'll be needing the query.db module. You'll see why all these are necessary in a bit, and I will just paste them in. All right, so this shouldn't look so different. This is the inquirer, this is the file system. Now, just for here, we are changing the name of the UUID v4 into v4. We are changing v4 and using UUID v4 instead. Just a sort of convention. You don't have to be bothered about that. Then we are importing the query.db from query.db.js, and that is all. So we'll just get started by creating the function that we'll be using for this file. You really don't have to export this because we are not using it in other file, but I love to export the first file just in case I ever need to use it in the future. So I just do export default, not the first file, the first function. I'll just mix that up. Async function add data. It doesn't need any parameter, so we just it takes in the info parameter. You will recall that the external function that is passed into the query.db here will take in an info variable, which is the data that is gotten from the database. So yes, it takes in the info arguments or variable. All right. Like in the query.db, the first thing we want to do here is to do the try catch block. Boom, just same thing. And what we want to do here, we just want to tell them that something went wrong, and because something went wrong, there's an error. So we just paste in some code. We've already done this before, so we can just paste it in. All right, cool. Now we're getting closer to the interesting part. I know you're wondering, how do we get to fetch data from the terminal? So that's what we want to do now. We'll be using the inquirer module. So what we'll do is to call on the inquirer. This is supposed to be an asynchronous function. So because it's an asynchronous function, we're supposed to have an await in the front here. Await. All right. Now the inquirer has a method called prompt. This takes the list of questions that we want to ask users. It also takes in the type of input we are looking out for. It takes some other things. Each object of question can give a message, a type, a name. It could give a default value. They could give maybe the lists or choices that they expect the user to choose from and stuff like that. For our case, we just need three, and that is the name, the phone number, and the age, just telling us if this person is an adult or a minor, stuff like that. This will help us to use some of those properties. So it's you open a and close bracket, and inside there you open a square bracket like this, so that we'll be able to make an array of objects. So just hit enter so that it opens. So what's the first thing we want to make there is the name. Now for the name, the type would be, of course, type of string, right? Yes, type of string, but here we'll call it input. So input is just fine. Then the name, so which name do you want to use and store the data? So name will be fine for me, just name. Then for the message, what do we want to tell the user? We want to ask them to enter their name. So please enter your name, like this. Right, let me just format that so that it falls in properly. Now we've done it for one, and that is for the name. We need another one for phone number. So we just change this. It should be a number, then phone, then we'll say please enter your number. That's fine. Then we will do another one. This one now says age, stuff like that. This would be lists, like there'll be list of options, and you say please, are you an adult? Are you an adult? So we just need yes or no for this. So we'll take the choices this time around. Choices, beautiful, and it will take an array of objects. Now inside the array we'll have the name and the value. So the name would be the name, what we want to store when a value is chosen. So the name can be the value. If the name is the same thing as the value, then you don't need to put in the two of them. In fact, all you need are two strings. Let me demonstrate that. So if the name and the string, if the name and the value are different, that's what we are doing now. So we just open, and then we'll put, it will be an array of options. So the option name could be something like adult. It should be a string adult, and then the value would be something like yes. Why? Just yes. Then if the person is a minor, so name would be minor, and value would be no. I am not. I think I'm mixing all this up. We are supposed to actually change it this other way. The name is what the user will see in the terminal, and the value is what will be submitted or stored as the value there in the database. So what we will do is, let's rewrite this. And so name, that is what the user will see in the in the terminal, is y, and the value would be adult. Just copy and paste that, change this to n, which means no, and change this to value of minor. Yes, and that is it. This is what we are looking for. Awesome. So we are not missing anything. Okay, just the comma here. Now we want to store all this in a variable, and that variable is answers. We can use a const, since this will not change after we fetched it. So equal to await this. All right, just to keep everywhere clean. All right, now with this we can prompt the user for inputs and they give us inputs. Now what do we do next? We need to organize this into an object. Each value we've gotten, we need to put it into an object and then now put it into the info array that we got from the database. All right, so coming down below here, let's set up a variable called data. Now in the data we want to have something like name would be answers. Now this answers will be an object already, right? So answers does name, the phone number would be answer dot phone number. What do we save this as here? The name. Okay, name is phone, not phone number. So we just use phone here. I think we can also change this back to phone. Okay. Then the last one is adults. So answer dot adults. Sorry, dot age. This should be age. Sorry. Okay, age. Let's just make sure that all these are in caps. They are well capitalized. Okay. So now we've created an object. We now want to add this object to whatsoever we had in the info. So if coming from the query DB here, if the info is still empty, it will be an empty array. However, if it already has data inside, it will be an array of objects. So what we just want to do here is to add whatsoever we have here in the data into the info. So it becomes info.push. We are pushing this data into this. So .push is a method that's available for arrays. They are used to add new data or new information, new stuff into an array. So we've achieved the first step. The next step for us is to check if the file exists. Now if that file exists, that is the database file, then we'll just add this information. We use this information to overwrite whatsoever we have already in the database. Now you start seeing why it's important that we first of all get this data from the database, because we are going to overwrite it. So when we are overwriting it, we are overwriting it with both the old data and the new data that has just been added. So let's check. The first thing here is check. It's going to be an if else statement. So check if the file exists, and we use exist sync, passing the file, and that is db.json. This has to be a string. Now if it exists, we'll call a function which we are yet to create, and that is add details. So what this function will do, or when we create it, is to take in this data and overwrite whatsoever we already have in the database with it. But assuming that this file doesn't exist yet, we need to create it. And so to create it, we'll use the append method. So we'll go into the else block, because we know that the file doesn't exist. Now let's create the file. To create the file, we'll do fs.append file. It takes in 3 parameters. The first one is the db.json, that is the name of the file, like this. The second one is the content, what we want to pass into it. Something to notice, you can only pass in a string. So if you're passing anything into a file that you want to write into, you need to make sure it's a string. You have to convert it to a string, which is also the same reason why we have to convert it back to the original format when we retrieve it. Now the last thing is like a callback function to check if there's error, and if there's no error, it returns a message. So just function, it has no name. Inside here we have error, and now we say if error happen, log to the console and say something like file creation or let's do creating file unsuccessful. All right. If it was successful, then we want to go ahead. And first of all log to the console and say that file was created. So we can just do db.json file created successfully. Now after this, we can now call on this same add details function. So either ways, we are calling on the add details function, and that is it for this side. For us to, now we missed something. Please, coming up here, we need to add an ID, which is what we use to locate each of this data that we are adding. So we'll come to this place and just call the UUID function, and that is all we really need here. Once we call this function, remember to make this a comma instead of semicolon. Once we call this here, it knows to generate and leave us here with a unique ID. All right. Now that is it for this. Next thing is to create the add details function, and we just need to do a create and add details like this. This one will take in the info parameter, and that is it. All right, we'll make it asynchronous too. We'll make it asynchronous, and when we jump right into it, all we are really doing here is to overwrite the file that we just created, or the existing file, with what we now have in the info variable. So to overwrite the file with a new data, what we need to do is do await fs.write file. Now for a moment, let me explain that the append file and the write file are similar, and they are different. They are different in that the append file can create file. They are the same in that the append file and the write file can create files if they are not existing. However, they are different because the append file do not override the data in a file. They only add new data to the bottom of the file. But the write file overwrites whatsoever is inside that file with the new thing you give to it. So if you do not want to overwrite your data or your file, make sure to use the append file. All right. So we want to write to the db.json file, .json. All right. And then what do we want to write to it? Recall that it has to be a string. So that means that at this point we need to convert the info array to what? To a string. So we stringify it, passing the info into it, and then after this, just do a callback function. Inside it has an error. All right, and then now inside the function, if we encounter an error, so let's say there's an error, we could just log to the console and say something like error over, let's say error writing to the database. However, if there are no problem, we just log to the console telling them that, hey, data, this has to be a string by the way, data added successfully. Boom. And that is it. That is all you really need for this file. So to put everything together, we will now call on the query.db file, function. Recall that we have to call the function. Now also recall that we have to pass in this function that we just created into the query.db function. So call on the add data, and once you call it this way, everything is set. Now what happens here now is when we call on this file, this function, that is the query.db, is run. When this query.db executes, it executes with this external function, which is the add data function, and as it calls on this function, everything here is executed down to this other part. So the time has now arrived for us to test what we have done and see if it is working fine. So node add data, hits enter, and it says enter your name. That's beautiful. So put Samson, or Sam is just fine. Let's put some number there, and then yeah, Samson is an adult. Whoop, we have an error. So it's telling us that the the file was created successfully. Data argument must be of type string or of instance. So where exactly is this error coming from? Where exactly are we getting this error from? We got this error somewhere around here. So where exactly? Let's see if I can debug this here. So okay, fs dot write file. Okay, all right, let's go back to here. Okay, okay, where are we getting it wrong? Data must be of type string or instance of buffer. So for that we converted this to a string here, right? Yes, that's what we did. Okay. Okay. So I just realized that I didn't pass in the info the info array here. So since I didn't pass it down, it's telling me that the data has to be of type string, and well, it's not of type string. It couldn't happen. So let's do that. It's seeing this as undefined, and since it's undefined, this couldn't work properly. But now that I have all that cleared up, let me run this again. So okay, let me go back to the top and start by deleting the file. Control K. And I hope you see that sometimes we could miss a thing or two, and we have to debug, look through our code, and just be sure of what's going on. Oh, okay, my camera is off. All right, so node add data, hit it like this, and so we do not have a file yet there. So let's put in Sam. All right, then next thing that we'll put in some numbers, and then yes, woof, correct. The db.json file was created successfully and the data was added successfully. That is actually what we are looking for. I had to take a while to debug my code, and I just missed one thing, and there was so much error. Now we have the db.json file which we just deleted. We have some data inside of it, like the one we just created. I could just create one more, just so that you see a little of difference. Yes, it's returning some data now because there is now data inside. But let's create one with Ebere. Yeah, we'll add some numbers. Ebere, okay, let's say Ebere is a minor. All right, you hit that, and I think there's something we are missing. When we go back here, we're missing a key, H. So this is supposed to be a lowercase a, I suppose. So let's clear this and try to add it again. So if you notice, it has not been coming in with the right keys. Yeah, it's coming with the right keys, but not the complete keys. Yeah. So let's say in Joko, hit enter, numbers, hit enter, and this is an adult, hit enter. So what we'll do now is to try to retrieve data. So retrieve data, hit enter, and good. The last one now has it right. So you could just check in a few of these mistakes. And let me just walk you through what this code is all about. All right. So first things first, we had to import a bunch of modules that are very necessary for us to be able to achieve our goal. So the first one is the inquirer, the second one is the file system, third one is the UID, and the last one is the query db.js. All right. The next thing we did was to create and export this function, and like I said, this is actually optional. You could just create an asynchronous function and push through. Next, we collected data from the inquirer, through the inquirer using inquirer.prompt. We made the inputs into a data and added it into the info array that we already had. Then we checked if this file already exists, that is the db.json file. If the database is already there, we just overwrite it with the new data that we have. However, if it is not in existence, then we use the append file to create a new file and then call on the add details function in order for it to overwrite the db.json file. Please make sure you do not forget the info variable, just as I did, and I had to spend some time debugging. Now, this is generally how it is for developers. Sometimes you spend hours, days, weeks or so debugging, but it's all fine. It's all how we learn and how we build better applications. I hope you've been able to learn a whole lot about file system, generating user IDs, using the terminal and all that. The next thing we'll be doing in the next video will be all about editing data. So we'll pick this data that we have created in this video and edit them in the next video. I will see you in that one too. Yup, we are here now for the update data. Yes. After adding data, sometimes we want to update it. We want to make some changes. We feel like we made a mistake or so. So that's what we want to handle here. What we'll be needing to import here, we'll be needing file system. We won't be needing the UUID anymore because the ID do not change. Yeah, other details may change. Then we'll be needing the query DB file. So just those. And finally, we'll also be needing the DB file check. This is totally necessary because we need to check if the database is already there. If it is not there, we'll just terminate the process instead of wasting resources, stuff like that. So I'll just paste all that in so that, okay, let me just paste that in. Okay, so as we continue, we'll see where all this is leading us to. So we begin as usual, export defaults, async, function. I believe all this now looks familiar. Updates, data. All right, it takes in info. Don't forget that. It takes in info as argument. And then we want to call the DB file check at the beginning here. We are calling at the beginning so that nothing even happens since there is no file. There is nothing to check. So why stress yourself? No reason. Next thing, we create our try and catch block. And as usual, we just paste in some code. All right, that's working. Then what we need to do is to know which data we want to edit. So how do we get to know? That is where the unique ID comes in, and that's why the unique ID do not change. So let's ask the user to give us a unique ID. We'll use the inquirer again. So we do const answers, just answers should be fine. Answer equal to await inquirer dot prompt right, just one field. That's what we require now. It will be of type input. inputs like that. Name is ID. Yeah, name is ID. And then message. Oh, let's fix this. Okay. Message. Please enter data. Let's use record ID. That's it. Just format that a little bit. Now, when we get this data, what we want to do is to loop through whatsoever we have in our database and see if we have that data. Now, if we have that data, we'll keep it safe or hold it in a variable so that we can use it in a bit. So, first thing is, where do we intend to save it? I mean, save the data that we'll get. So we'll just set let's call this variable user, and then we'll now loop through. We'll use the info, this point. We'll use the for each loop. The for each loop is also used by an array and some other kind of data types too. Remember that we got this info from the query db function. So for each, you open brackets, and then inside of it you pick each data at a time. So each of the data, we could call each data elements, and then it takes in a callback function too. So it's taking in two arguments. That is one is each of the data, or an element representing each data, and then there's a callback function where everything happens. So what do we want to check here? We want to check if there is any match. So if if elements dot id is equivalent to answer dot id, then user becomes the element. What we are saying here is, if we meet any of the existing data that matches this ID that was just passed in, then we'll now save the data as user. Make sense? Beautiful. Now, when this is done, we will now come down. We will now come down below this, and then we'll try to update whatever that is already there in the user. So for this, we'll create a new function that will build out under this current function, and we could call that update details. Update details. Do not forget, it needs two arguments, and that is the user, then the info, two of them. So we'll now go down and build out this function. This function will look very similar to our add data function, so you don't have to sweat it out. So what we'll be doing now is a lot of repetition of what we've done before, but they are very necessary as we are building out the rest part of our code. So we'll just call on this function. We'll call it update details. Recall, it takes in the user and the info as arguments. So what's the first thing we want to do? The first thing we want to do is now to request for inputs from the user, and see where they want these inputs to be, what they want to overwrite or what they want to update. Now, something that we'll do is to provide them with their initial value. We won't provide an initial value and they see the value and they feel like this value is valid, they could just hit enter instead of rewriting or retyping that value. Now, this is important when you have to write something that's more complicated than maybe just a name or phone number, stuff like that. So let's begin. Let's begin with our try and catch block. Try catch block. All right. As usual, let's paste this in here. All right. Now, first things we want to get is what? The inputs. All right. So let's get those inputs. The inputs, we could use okay. Now let's use feedback. Let's just diversify feedback. Okay, equal to this has to be async. All right, so that this is await inquirer dot prompt. Okay, open this, and then this is, yeah, it's an array of objects. Now what I am collecting here is the same thing I collected in the add data file. So I could actually just paste this like this, just copy this and paste it right in here. But we want to do something extra. We do not want to just collect this detail like we said. We want to also show them the defaults. We want to show them their initial inputs as default. So what we'll now do is we introduce one key for each of these inputs, and that is the default. So let's put it here. I'll put default. Now where are we going to get this from? We are getting it from the user that we just made or that we just saved. And so here we could put user dot name, comma. I hope this is making sense. We came up here and we found the user that our user wants to update. Now we came down here and we're now passing in those details here, so that if the user do not want to update it, he can just hit enter and pass it by. So user dot phone. Down here we also have defaults, and it could be user dot age. And that's all. We'll format this and we have it nice and clean. So if you look properly, we now have the defaults added to each of them. Now when we try to update, we will now see the initial option or the initial value that was there. This will all make sense when we are testing it, in case it's not making sense right now. All right, now when we finish collecting details about this person, what do? We now want to update whatsoever or whosoever that we are working on. So to update it, we do user dot name. Now we are now updating it with the feedback. We now say user dot name is now equals to feedback dot name, user dot phone is now equal to feedback dot phone, user dot age is now equal to feedback dot age. All right, good. So we now have an updated user. All we now have to do is to add this user to the info, and everything is done. We will now overwrite the database and everything is complete. Just watch it out. That's what we're about to do next. So what we're about to do next is to update the database. And how are we updating it? Exactly what we've done before. And what did we do before? We just did await fs.write file. Remember the difference between write file and append file. Which file are we writing to? db.json. After this, what are we writing to it? We are writing to it a stringified version of the info. After this is a callback function. It takes in error as argument, and here if there's error, it tells you that there was an error. Error updating database. If there's no error, log to the console and say user, this has to be a string too, user updated successfully. Wow, and that is it. Our code is complete. Our code is complete. So let's check, is this working perfectly? Can we trust it? All right. We'll now do node updates.js, hit enter. Whoa, I think I made a mistake. It should be update data.js. And by the way, we have not done one thing. We need to do one more thing here, which is actually call the function. So we need to use query_db, and in the query_db, we'll call the update data function. Hopefully everything should work fine this time around. So hit enter. Woo! It's working fine. We have 3 data here, right? Notice that this 2 doesn't have the adult key. So let's try and see if we can update that. So enter the record ID, hit enter. Now the name, here we could change from Sam to Samson. The phone. Now there is an issue here that I need to check. It's not showing the default value. So where exactly did I get that one wrong? Defaults. Okay. Okay. Let's see this. Okay. Just to be sure, I think this was meant to be capital letter. I think so. All right, let's save that. I think it's supposed to be capital letters. I think it's case sensitive. Okay, let's go again and paste that record, hit enter, boom, it shows. So this is case sensitive, and I think I missed it initially. You need to check it out so that it doesn't mess up. So we have Sam there, so we could change it to Samson. Hit enter. We have some numbers there. You could change it to a longer number. Hit enter. Something could be a minor. So this is successful. Now, just to be sure that everything worked fine, let's retrieve data. Data.js hits, and where is Samson? Awesome. Now we're having 2 keys. I think we made some mistakes somewhere around where we had the keys. All right, so this, I think, is supposed to be capital letter. We need to it need to be, these things are case sensitive, so that's why I have 2 phone numbers here too. So this has to maintain the capital letters, phone, age. Yeah, I mixed all that up, so sorry about all that. So let's try again to update data. So update, we'll pick this one that's not messed up yet. I think everything should be fine this time around. Put it this way, hit enter. We have a bearer. We could change it to a bearer plenty. Hit it. Let's have a longer number now. Hit, and okay, let's leave it at yes. Let's clear this, and then let's try retrieving our data again. Hit it, and good. We are no longer having multiple data like we had here, and that is beautiful. Awesome. So please be sure to check for case sensitivity. I messed all of them up here when I didn't pay attention to that detail. But let me walk you through what I have done here. We began by importing modules as usual, then creating a function. But this time around, we are introducing the DB file check, which is supposed to help us to check if the database file exists. Now, if it doesn't exist, everything is terminated, and the user has to, check and maybe create data or check if there's something wrong. Now after that, in the try block, we requested for the ID of the user. After requesting for the ID of the user, we moved next to search for that user, found the user, and then called the update details function. We passed in the user that we got and the info down to this function. Coming into this function, we got back all the details that the user already had and put it in the default like this. And so when we are asking the user for a particular detail this time around, we are showing them the default too. And so if they hit enter, that default will continue to be there. Then we updated each key accordingly and then overwrote the file. And that is it. We have an updating application. What is more, we have one more thing, and that is to delete data. Delete data, there we'll be looking at how to remove any or all of this data that we have done. I will see you in that one too. Alright, it is the final video of this series, and I hope you have been enjoying this series as much as I have been enjoying it. We have covered a whole lot. We started from the regular introduction to installing Node, to installing NPM, setting up the Node project, installing dependencies, creating files, checking if files exist, reading from files, adding to files, updating files, and now we are here to delete file. Yes, that's what I want to do. What we are going to do here is very similar to what you have learned already, so it should be very easy to follow. We'll be collecting the ID of whatsoever data that we want to edit. Then we'll look through the data there and remove every data that do not match to that one, and then we'll keep those ones and use them to overwrite the file. Once we've done that, the file is gone, the data is gone or deleted, and then we'll have a new set of data that do not have an entry that we do not want. Boom, that's all. We'll be done in a minute. So let's get started. We need to import a few things, and we've used them before. So we need the file system, we need the DB file check, we need the query DB, and what more do we need? I think that's all. Yes, then the inquirer here. Inquirer, just the way we used it in the update file. Yeah. All right. Let's start by creating an asynchronous function. Let's put default, please. Asynchronous function. So this one is remove data. Or it also takes in the info. All right. We'll start by checking if this file exists. If the file exists, we'll continue. However, if it does not exist, we expect it to terminate at this point. Then let's do our try and catch block, and we can just paste in this line here. All right. Then first things first, we need to collect the data that will help us to find what we are looking for, and that is the ID. So we could just copy this, paste it in here. So what we are doing here is to ask the user to enter the record ID. That's the ID of the data he or she wants to delete. Now after that, we'll now do a little logic. First things first, we need somewhere that we can keep the data that do not match this ID, and those will be the remnant. So as the name sounds, we'll call it the remnant. So let's remnant equal to, let's say remnant data equal to an empty array. And now we loop through the array that we have. We could use the info.forEach. We could just use for each, and that's fine. I think so. .forEach elements. So what we are checking is if elements dot id do not match answer dot id, then add it to the remnant array. So you do remnant dot push. What is it pushing into it is the element. Now what will happen is, by the end of these iterations, every element that doesn't match this ID would no longer be part of this remnant, and this remnant is what we are going to be adding or using to overwrite the current data in the database. Now when this is done, we now have a set of data that are new and do not have what we don't want, and the final thing to do is just to go and overwrite the database again. So let's go. So we need await fs dot write file db.json. Recall that it takes in 3 arguments. So the first one is the file, the second one is data, and we have to stringify it. So that's stringify so that we don't get an error. Remnant data, and then the last thing is a callback function. It has no name, by the way. It just takes in error as arguments, and then if there is an error, all right, if there is an error, we just reduce this. No, this will be too small for you to see. I'm trying to make sure you see everything I'm doing clearly. Okay, so if there is an error, you could just log to the console and say error while updating database. Else, we log to the console and say record deleted successfully. That is it. The code is complete. All right, so let's do the final thing, and that is to call the function inside of the query DB function, like that. Now we test what we have done. All right, to test it, we just do node remove data. Now let's remove this data that's messed up. So we take the ID, paste it, hit enter, and it tells us the record has been deleted successfully. Let's be sure that everything actually works well. So let's do retrieve data, hit enter, and boom, we have just 2. Well, we could delete another one, so let's delete this one. So which one are we removing? We'll paste it, hit enter, delete successfully. Now let's check. Retrieve, that's not what we want to do. We want to leave this. Retrieve, yes, hit enter, and we'll have 1 data. So that shows everything is working. But let me walk you through what I have just done. We began by importing all this: the acquirer, the file system, the query db.js file, the db file check.js file too. And then we first of all checked if the db file exists. Now, if it doesn't exist, this code will be terminated. However, if it exists, we'll continue, and that's why we continued. All right. Next thing that we did was to ask the user to enter an ID for the data they want to delete. Now, after they've given us that, we looked through each of the data, found all the data that do not match, and kept them inside the remnant data. Now we overwrote the db.json file with the remnant data, and so we now have a clean slate, sort of. And that is how we come to the end of this whole application. And if you look at it, you will see that this is a CRUD application, and did not need an external database. We created our own database by ourselves by manipulating file the way we wanted it. Now, just to be sure that the db file check works, let's delete this file. That's the db.json file, and then try to run the code again. Okay, so let's run it again. I'm supposed to run remove data, right? Node remove data, hit, and it tells us that file does not exist, which is what it's supposed to be, if you recall, in our db file check file. See it? All right, so for me, it's been really thrilling to make all these videos, tutorials for anyone who is watching. I really appreciate you being here, and it shows that you found something, because this is the last video and there has been a whole lot I've been teaching, and it shows you want to be here. I really appreciate that. So what you do is, please, to try something that I didn't do. Something I didn't do is trying to delete more than one item at a time, or trying to update more than one item at a time. Try that and see how strong or how well you've been able to learn Node.js, and see how it could be better. Something I could also do is to add links to my other Node.js tutorials that are a little more advanced than this. And if you have these basics, then those ones wouldn't be much of an issue. You just scale through gradually and you get better. Node.js is really cool. It helps you to build application fast and using the same language that you use for your front end, and that makes it really awesome. So please do not forget to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and share it to everyone that you can share it to. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in my next tutorial.